Welcome, everyone, to the Builder and Wiser podcast, where we never stop growing. I'm your co host, Michelle Kramer.
And I'm Peter Wang.
Today, we're joined by Alison Vigil, president of Rocksbox, an online fashion jewelry destination designed to help customers discover new brands and styles. Rocksbox is a division of Signet Jewelers. And Alison is a retail executive and entrepreneur with 20 plus years of experience working with beloved brands, including Gap, Fab Kids, and Fabletics. Welcome, Alison. We're so excited to have you. And I had the total pleasure of getting to know Allie in both of our first jobs out of college at a boutique consulting firm called Alliance Consulting Group. We want to dive into your illustrious career. But before we do that, I'd love to go back all the way to the beginning. You grew up just not too far from here in Saratoga, California. I've had the pleasure of getting to know not just you and your beautiful family over the years, but also your parents and your brother. Would love to hear, Allie, a little bit about how you grew up and how that influenced your journey as a leader.
I grew up in Saratoga. My parents moved there when I was in first grade. My dad left a long career in a hardware manufacturing company to take the leap into the startup world, which I think planted seeds early on as far as what I was watching him do and how I was watching him come to life with the process. They ended up moving from Detroit, Michigan, where I was born, to Saratoga, California, which specifically was a community that has a lot of kind of entrepreneurs and tech executives, and like a really interesting place to move in the early 80s. And definitely a community of achievement minded. It was a really insular, lovely place to grow up. In hindsight, everyone that came from Saratoga calls it the bubble, because it definitely is like a very precious and protected pocket of the world. The kids that I went to school with in first grade, I went to school with throughout my entire school experience before leaving for college. Not just a family and a neighborhood, but a full community of people that really knew me. But also there are things that come along with that. And I think I'm probably an achiever by nature, but certainly also by nurture, as I think about the way that I looked up to my father growing up and the way I looked up to the rest of the community and tried to really carve an identity out for myself in that way. So great place to grow up, but also planted some seeds of things I wanted to try and do differently as I left high school. I have two daughters, 7 and 5. I really want to instill in them a sense that they can find a profession where they can be themselves and where they can try the things that they want to do. I want to instill a sense of possibility. And there are ways in which they're similar to me or to my husband, and there are ways in which they're completely their own people. And trying to be conscious of giving them the space to let their own interests lead them and flourish versus me pushing an interest of mine or an unfulfilled kind of dream of mine on them, which is hard as a parent not to do. I just want them to feel like, wow, I could be anything if I just can dream it.
I'm curious because we worked together in your first job out of school. As you thought about the transition from consulting to what's next, how did you approach that decision?
Consulting and investment banking were two fairly well-worn tracks. To me, consulting seemed like a really interesting choice because I was feeling a little bit of a pull towards the business world. I'd seen a little bit of it, but not enough to have any perspective on what industry or what even functional area felt like a fit.
That is totally relatable. And I'm curious, when you made the transition from consultant to operator, if you had a hunch that retail was going to be your kind of heart home for the next 20 plus years.
What I did know at the time was like, wow, this is a space where I get it as a consumer versus I'd come from a space of working with a lot of technology clients and trying to put yourself in the shoes of someone who's developed some unique piece of software and they're trying to figure out what the product is and put myself in the shoes of someone who might need a distributed content management system for kiosks is not as natural for me.
Mhm.
So I definitely knew at the time, wow, I'm setting up an interesting space for learning when I can really connect with the end customer of the work that I'm trying to do. But I thought it was a 1 year stop. I really did. I left consulting at 3 years. Traditionally, everyone leaves consulting, goes to business school, and emerges from business school. Or at least this is the way that I saw it, with like all of their dreams will fulfilled. They've landed in the industry that they've had their eye on the whole time. They've won this amazing role, this amazing job. Like business school is a pivot point and can help you achieve those outcomes. And I was not clear on what I wanted those outcomes to be. So I didn't feel like I was ready to go. I felt like I needed hands-on experience doing something. That's why I was craving an operator role. The retail part was a little bit of an accident. And then once I got into it, I just couldn't stop. I couldn't see myself stopping. I was in the Gap.com business within the Gapping enterprise infrastructure, and it was a really small entrepreneurial team, and we would put things up on site and measure them the next day and have an idea about what to do next. And those learning cycles were so exciting to me. And then I was planning the women's business, and I was like, I can think all day long about how often somebody's going to wear denim versus wear khaki pants. I could totally do this. I loved that role. I loved that role so much.
In the years that you were working in retail, what did you learn about yourself? What did you see that's surprising?
I was surprised, I guess, first of all, how much more curiosity I had in that context than in the prior context. I feel like I had always thought of myself as, I don't think I've actually ever told anyone this story out loud, so this would be the first. But thinking of yourself as an achiever and a high performer, and then I got put in this context where like my review feedback was sometimes like, you did a good job on this, but kind of surprised that you're not more curious about it, or that you didn't seek out other ways to make this better. And I had no sort of way of internalizing that feedback, because I was like, wow, I thought I did what I was supposed to do.
Was that as a consultant, the feedback, or? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I thought I was a high performer, but I was not showing up as one, because I guess I was not showing up with this kind of drive for what's next and what could better look like and what would the next level look like in hindsight. But in the retail world, I was hungry for everything I could pick up about how to run that business. And I remember I came in as a planner, which is not entry level, but fairly junior, and wanting to see everything. I would show up early at my boss's office and be like, show me how markdowns work. I want to learn it. And then after a couple of weeks of showing up early on a Tuesday morning, he's, do you want to do it? And I took over markdowns. And I just kept like eating it up. I'm so hungry.
Tell us about markdowns.
So the role of a planner is to drive the business through, like drive a group of products or a category of products through their life cycle. In a fashion business, you bring things on. Sometimes they're only intended to be in support of an ad, and then they're supposed to go away respectfully and quietly and not with too much pain. Sometimes you've got a pair of jeans that is meant to live forever, or whatever forever is in a fashion world.
Mm.
And then you've got things that are in between, maybe a puffy vest that's meant to last from fall through winter. That's a seasonal product. They all have these intended life cycles. And managing the products through the life cycles compared to how you thought they would perform. If they're outperforming, you don't have to worry as much about it. If they're underperforming, you have to do something to move it along. So either put it higher up on the website so it's more visible, or feature it in an ad, or talk about it on Instagram, or mark it down. Price is the number one lever. So we would go through a cadence of markdowns, some of them planned and some of them responsive to the business. And that was a key piece of trying to do that in a way that protected as much margin as possible, protect the health of the overall business, but also converted your inventory back into cash where you needed it.
You mentioned that there's a profile of what a successful planner looks like. And I'm curious to learn more about that and how you fit or didn't fit that mold.
Yeah. So planners were a core part of the product team for any category. There was a planner who was responsible for the financials and the inventory investment and getting through the life cycle, as I just described. the production counterpart who gets styles produced through vendor partnerships and sourcing strategies, and then the merchant who is responsible for knowing who is the customer for this, what do they need, how do I have an assortment that meets all of those needs and is balanced between how much someone might want to buy the black t-shirt versus the white one, to just use an example. And the merchants were like 100% the hub of this whole operation. They were the communications hub. They were the decision maker. Everything ran through the merchant. They were the owner of the business, and the planner and the production counterpart were supporting actors. If I mention the profile of success, it's probably less about the planner and the production counterpart. It's more about the merchant, who's usually the extrovert in the room, loves to stand up in front of a room and talk about their business and show things, and has an easy way of taking questions, an easy way of answering them. And successful merchants at the Gap in particular all looked and felt the same. Much more extroverted than I, much more confident than I felt. And you're in that environment, a lot of times the developmental feedback is just learn to like take up more space in the meeting and learn to develop your voice. Just go work on developing your voice. And it was less about how can, as an introvert or as someone who has a different style of listening and engaging, how can a person like that be successful here?
Yeah.
What might that look like? So I was comparing myself to something that I wasn't, and trying to become something and feeling really misaligned.
And how did you move through that?
I tried a lot of different styles of develop my voice or put down the pen. There's all the different kind of ways of metaphors for that. At a certain point in my career, I was fortunate enough to have access to a coach. So that definitely helped. But even then, it helps me more with individual relationship building and navigating the organization. Then it helped me show up in the room differently, in my opinion. In some respects, I was who I was because my mindset was like, I need to become this other thing. And I'm not that thing. I'm feeling a lack of being that thing instead of what can I lean into to show up as me.
When you get feedback on your voice, like develop it. Did that resonate? What did that mean for you?
Like that was the question I had. What does that even mean? How would one do that?
The reason I asked how you navigated through it to the destination that you're at now, I've seen some similarities in my own path. There's different types of alignments and misalignments. One of the best relationships I had with a manager was someone who I felt like we had a lot of similarities in terms of our strengths, but he had achieved a level of competency and success that I was still on the path to. And I was able to learn because he could give me really critical feedback, but it was feedback that was authentic to my strengths. Whereas another person that I worked for had a very opposite strengths, same organization, also like very collaborative relationship, but I didn't feel that I broke through the next level of performance with that person, because even though I liked them and would work for them again, it just wasn't as resonant to my authentic strengths. So I've learned that finding fit in terms of corporate dominant culture and management fit in terms of chemistry is the holy grail. It's hard to find that for a lot of people. And I'm curious where you landed.
I think that's spot on. The only thing I would add to that is the yes and of a mentor or multiple mentors. I've found it to be helpful to have mentors that have similar characteristics and have overcome them or have a personal perspective on that same problem, as as the opposite personality who can help me calibrate how I'm perceived or how I show up versus how I feel I'm showing up.
Definitely.
The other thing about the literary background is the development of empathy. And that to me connected to how I think about and center our customer as much as I can. It's also how I interact with my team. Both being into both sides of that, I would argue it's always been important. There's more awareness on it now. And then especially with how tumultuous the world has been since COVID in particular, but with just everything going on in the world, having empathy as a foundation for how I interact with my team and how we navigate this has been crucial to keeping us moving, retaining the team, motivating people, all of it.
One of the things I hear very frequently from leaders coming up in the ranks who are managing teams of larger and larger sizes, diverse performance profiles, is this need to be coached through managing, holding empathy and holding high performance at the same time. And I'm curious how you advise folks or what you've learned from your own journey of holding those two things.
It's so hard. I'm always projecting like, oh, this person must be feeling overloaded and therefore I'll do something differently around that. And I have to actively remind myself, give them the opportunity to ask, let them tell you it's too much. I still don't think I push hard enough most of the time.
Push hard enough for outcomes or push hard enough? Yeah.
Yeah. That's something that I'm like constantly trying to figure out the right balance. The way that I've thought about the accountability question is in some ways using the OKR framework, but having a shared objective and shared results that we are mutually locked in and aspiring to as a team,
Hmm.
but also in some ways not being accountability centric on the outcomes, being accountability centric on the process and the approach. I've been really trying to create a test and learn culture and a fail fast and respond kind of culture where we're not going to get everything right. We're going to make mistakes. The intent is to make mistakes and learn from them as fast as we can
Hmm.
and tee up the next thing and do it in a way where we can learn as quickly as possible. There's an outcome that we're striving for, but is not tied to outcomes in the same way around accountability. I'd much rather know that there are tests in the pipeline aimed at driving cart conversion on site than knowing that cart conversion is at X%, but we don't know how we got there.
I've seen this the reverse. When you see a success, we hit numbers. People are like, yes, this is great. But you don't really know exactly how. So there's not a clear diagnosis of how we got there, but we celebrate and we move on.
Mm.
And then when the results don't repeat itself is when we start to learn, oh, this didn't work.
Mm.
It's more like the critical thinking aspect of it. What did you say? Show up as a thinker? Is it something like that?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's I feel that's really the goal for the team. Everyone shows up the thinker. The
I'm
goal.
curious how you sell the concept of inputs because it makes so much sense. I have seen these very successful businesses where there's been an acknowledgement of we're doing awesome. We're not exactly sure how to untangle the why. And yet, ultimately, it's hard to move away from outcomes.
Mm.
What do you have to do as a leader inside of a larger company to sell that pivot?
Speaking of pivots, we're in the process of pivoting the Rocksbox brand from a subscription model, a subscription rental business to something totally different. To do that, we've taken it down to its essence and we're building it back up customer by customer and order by order. While
Wow.
we have explicit targets for how many orders we want to hit this month or next month and how much traffic we think we're going to need to get there, those numbers aren't impressive to anyone in our larger organization, which is a multi-billion-dollar world's largest retailer of diamond jewelry. And we are talking about 50 orders right now from this source to know that I've got a handle on this source. So we have broken it down to the essence of piece by piece. What are we doing to drive traffic and how do we measure it? What are we doing to convert that traffic? And then what are we doing to build the brand? And those, in essence, are a paraphrase of my 3 objectives. I've got 3 to 5 KRs against each of those. We've walked through the whole thing as a team and everybody's got their name on one of them or sometimes more. And this is the one pager everyone's going to take to bed with them. And this is it for us until we get there. And then it's a new version of that page.
I have a lot of respect for that phase of the company or that phase of the product because there's clarity of, I call it the variables in the equation, right? Literally is the multiplying, right? Traffic times conversion, right?
Now,
So,
as a planner, to go back to those days, I knew I needed to sell 50 pairs of medium wash, like fit and flare denim a week on the site to get to X number in revenue of that to get to my plan of X $million. But I had no connection the marketing team was doing to make that possible. And I just assumed that I would have the traffic to do that thing. later in my career there, we started to connect those dots, but still you just assume the traffic's going to be there. And it was fairly disconnected. And it was later stages, like when I got to Fab Kids and Fabletics, where, wow, my marketing exec needs to be my best friend and my closest relationship, because I need to know what offers are out there and what kind, not only how much traffic you're bringing through, but who is that traffic? And are they going to want a legging or a tennis skirt? And, as soon as possible, we need to plan that together.
Let's unpack that a little bit. Because you come from the Gap world where there's lots of traffic, the brand is already established. You can play the role of a planner, representing one variable in the equation, assuming your input, which is like traffic, is already there. Then you move to Fabletics, Fab Kids, a newer brand. And all of a sudden, you have to care about your inputs, right?
I think as a women denim planner, I just knew that I was being asked to grow it by 5% over the prior year, or 9% over the prior year, depending on where we were in the time of me being there. So it's a fairly low risk game in the sense of you've got a pattern, you've got a playbook from last year. You can observe some things that didn't work and that you might try differently with more inventory or less inventory or another color or what have you. But nowhere are you starting from a blank page and saying, wow, how am I going to go out and get this? Fab Kids was a blank page. And Fabletics was not a blank page when I stepped in. They were probably in about the $50 million range. So wildly successful out of the gate. I described what it was like culturally at Gap, and I loved merchandise planning and grew as much as I could in that space until I felt like, wow, am I at my cap on this? Can I be a better merch planner? What would that look like? Like, how do I want to be the best merch planner or the best leader of a merch planning organization, or do I want something different? And I had, in my last role at the Gap, taken on a role that was the head of a market. So I got to integrate more the Canada market for Banana Republic, operated as its own thing, but leveraged off of the US. And so we could pick from the US assortment, we could pick from US marketing, but make it our own. So I didn't do all of those things from scratch, but I got to have a hand in what is the right shape of this for the market based on what I see. I loved being able to put those pieces together and loved integrating that perspective and just wanted more of that faster. And I ended up having, as I was trying to think about what to do from that role, what a next step would look like from that role, I ended up taking an outside meeting with an entrepreneur who was kicking the tires on an idea. He had a pitch deck. He was a serial entrepreneur and he'd done software, both on the technical side, as well as a lot of deep marketing, but hadn't been in retail specifically. And so he was asking me to just chat about this new model and what I thought the inventory complexities might be and how I would think about it. And we had coffee, which was not a normal thing for me to do, to just meet a stranger and talk about something different without knowing like what the outcome was going to be. I was obsessed with the idea. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I think I spent 2 hours with Andy and then went home and stayed up all night thinking about, this is how I would think about it. These are the questions I would ask. This is how I might approach it as a first stab. And when he asked me to meet up with him again and meet some of the people he was thinking about bringing on as his founding team, I just couldn't jump fast enough. So I ended up just knowing that was a great next move for me and not even really having to think twice about it. I just left the safety of this mothership organization and took a flying leap into the startup world for something that had raised a seed round and had a working name that was not Fab Kids. And we were developing a subscription model for kids, clothing and accessories. As kids, the parents listening, your kids are like playing hard and destroying their clothes and growing quickly and like trying to provide a solution for that kind of rapid growth, quality, value, style kind of intersection. Clothes that a kid would be excited to wear, that would be expressive of a kid's style, would stand up to the wear and tear, and then also not be so expensive that you couldn't just age out of them as your kid grows from one size to the next. So that was the premise of it. Andy invited me to join his founding team, and I was super, super pumped to do that and ended up joining to lead merchandise planning, but also he needed help with some other things that he asked me to do, which were create a vendor base and vendor networks, take on sourcing, operations kind of problems, as well as the production of the garments, which were things that I had worked with those partners at Gap Inc. And so I had some idea of what they did, but not how they did it. And just this big sort of like start from a blank page problem of, okay, we want to make kids clothes. Where do we start? Who can do that? If they're going to be produced in Asia, like how do we get them here? What does that mean? And so really uncomfortable, unfamiliar territory. But in some ways, like the best thing I could have ever done for myself, because I went from this world where I felt like I had to know everything to be successful and I was never going to know everything, to this world where in no way can I know everything. That's not possible. I just have to show up. I have to think hard. I have to be resourceful. I have to ask as many questions of as many people as possible. I was on the phone relentlessly with everyone I could find on LinkedIn or friends of friends of friends, researching different potential vendor partners, researching different 3PLs, researching different shipping methods, packaging. I remember one day I had a guy show up at my house with a bunch of corrugate. And this is great. Thanks. What to do with this? What size should the box be? I don't know. So
It's funny. I'm smiling because I'm going through similar sourcing, like stainless steel bottles. Who's making these? I'm taking photos. I'm looking for little tags. A box showed up. I'm like, whoa, that's a manufacturer. I'm going to take a photo of the manufacturer so I can talk to them. Same, like
there are clues everywhere.
you were talking about like the feedback of like, developing your voice. You're like, what does that mean? Because they
Yeah.
didn't see your strength. Was it at Fab Kids when you felt like, hey, because one thing I noticed as you were describing is the expectation set has just completely changed.
Yes.
You should know this too. No one knows this. Is that what freed you up?
100%. I felt like I
Mm.
entered this world of everything is possible. And maybe there's a better way versus a less optimal way to do something, but is there a right way? I don't think so.
That's so resonant because the roles that I was always chasing as ones that lit me up were the ones where you were building the playbook. And that was true when when you and I worked together at Buddy Media, just closing deals that had never been closed before
Mhm.
and integrating a print and digital sales force at the New York Times, starting a cross PA initiative at Google. I just love those kinds of things. Allie, in terms of your career, this theme of curiosity keeps on coming up. And I'm curious about this idea of curiosity and how it's showing up for you now.
I think it has been integral to me shifting from a place of feeling like, wow, I don't know how to be successful in this career. Am I ever going to get there? To this idea of, I don't know, curiosity for its own sake. The process of learning and trying and creating and building to me is so endlessly energizing. That's the outcome for me. So I think you mentioned the transition to digital, which I think is super interesting, but like extra interesting because right now I feel like physical is making a comeback, and how you integrate those things is really key. People are craving in-person experiences, and there's more spending right now on services and experiences than on goods. And there's a rise of the retail location as a way of creating connection and community that doesn't exist in the same way in a purely digital world. Who are the brands that can do the best job of bringing those things together and
Mhm.
creating something new out of fusion of those things?
Yep.
I hope that we can do that. I'm watching to see other brands do it. It's a really fun time to be watching the space.
Think is doing it well when it comes to that sort of magic in-person experience.
Oh, there are some interesting examples. Obviously close to home, but I love how Fabletics took their like purely digital play into retail stores specifically to enhance the experience for their community of followers, community of VIPs, and make the in-store experience really different and better.
I just thought they have like a huge scrubs line.
Yeah. They launched a scrubs business, which is really interesting category expansion. I think that's been really good for them. They first launched stores as a way of saying, let's use that as a data collection mechanism for what people are touching and picking up and trying on and whether it fits or it doesn't fit. Use all of that product feedback to make it better. And then having a physical experience is brand building and brand haloing in a way that you'll never accomplish purely just from digital spend. So it's can be a great growth driver, I think, in that regard, if you do it right. But watching what they've done with data and really integrating the experience has been really cool. The other story that I'm really obsessed with and not as connected to is the Poppy soda brand. Are you
Yeah.
familiar with
Yeah.
Poppy?
Yeah.
Poppy is having a wildly successful moment in time right now. It's so awesome to see. The founder, whose name is also Allison, I got to meet her at a conference once when she founded the brand, and the branding was mother. And it was like, it looked, it was in like a glass soda bottle that would remind you of an old time beer bottle or something like old time Coke bottle.
Yeah.
And it was branded really forward, like for your gut health, mother's soda. And it took her a couple years of trying that, and she decided to rebrand it as Poppy and call it a soda that's like also good for your gut, but it's a soda first and foremost. And it's not as amazing. It's visually really arresting. It's super colorful and really graphic. And it's like very of the moment in the way that she did that. She was able to move a lot of that, drive a lot of brand exposure through Amazon. I think when I met her, it was maybe a little over a year ago, and she was really excited to be the #1 soda moving through Amazon ahead of Coke, Pepsi. Wow. And she's gone on to do like such bigger and more like omni experience kind of things. They were the #1 ad. They had one ad. Their first TV ad ever was a Super Bowl ad. She went for it, like swung for the
Wow.
fences, and they were the #1 Super Bowl ad. I'm pretty sure I saw that product placed in like a pretty popular movie that came out last year. And she did a pop-up immersive Poppy Mart experience in LA that featured music and art and all kinds of things. So it's a really interesting experiential take on like just being present for people, but she also has an army of influence. It's like very current of the moment
But the approach to the
marketing that
shakeup.
feels like there's an army of people who drink and love Poppy is what it feels like as a consumer.
Mhm.
I myself have a fridge full of Poppy.
I remember reading their story about how she was discovered at Whole Foods.
Yeah.
It wasn't like an overnight success. It was through cycles. And I think because I am now in that space, I started paying attention to brands. There was one called Witch, actually, because one of our podcast guests, Don, mentioned about Witch. So I looked at Witch, did some research on them, and it's like a sandwich shop that started like 1990s, perhaps. Now they have 300 plus stores. They have multiple brands. They got coffee brand. They have basically a portfolio of brands, which is a different approach too. Just not like sticking with just, and also he did a franchising versus all corporate owned as a way of
Interesting.
expansion. You talk individual purchases to subscription, memberships, portfolio brand approaches to distribution channels. I just talked to a guy who was big on protein powders. And he's TikTok is 8x sales than his Amazon. Amazon was #1 in
Wow.
China, and TikTok's like 8x that. So like we're seeing things happen in retail. It's not really aggregated in one place, like what's going on in retail. But
Yeah.
I was excited to talk to you as well, just to hear your thoughts on retail.
There's a sea change happening in the younger generations, how they're discovering brands and how they're building trust with brands and where they decide to purchase from that brand. TikTok being one of those spaces. I will start my search process on Google, right? And start from there. And hearing that Gen Z consumers start their search process on TikTok. And that's a place where they can not only discover new brands, or they can also educate themselves about a brand, build trust by hearing how other kind of authentic individuals
Brands.
experience that brand. And they can do all that research in one space, and they can do it visually and bite size, right? In 6 seconds or less. So that is just changing the landscape so drastically. It's super fascinating.
Yeah, China. And I remember a couple years ago it was like the top conversation, maybe V3 now.
Mhm.
So my personal take is I don't buy anything from Temu personally. The quality variability is so high, but it's very cheap.
Allie, as we wrap up, I'm really curious how you define success.
I think the exciting thing I can say to that is it's so personal. And I wouldn't have said that 20 years ago. My understanding of success would have been what others see and expect and perceive of me. And I think now I have much more of a mindset of wanting to feel in alignment with how I'm spending my time. So I want to feel like I'm spending time in alignment with my values, in balance with my family, and my desire to learn, and my desire to create, my desire to be outside. There are things that are just undeniable truths of me. And the more I can be in alignment with those things, the better I am, the stronger I am professionally. So it's been really interesting. I thought it would be letting go of things and taking a step back maybe to allow some of those things in. The more I can be balanced, create like with the creative side of myself and the analytical side of myself, the more exciting ideas like come to life. So it's like, what are those things and how can you live in alignment with those things? And that to me is what I want to keep doing.
That's
Does that mean like,
so beautiful you have for someone who wants to incorporate a love of being outside into a life as a retail executive?
Now every day is work from home for me. So we've just closed our office and we've gone fully remote. And so I can take calls outside or do things outside. But we also, part of what we do is design jewelry, and there's a little bit of bringing inspiration in. There's different ways of thinking about it. You can think about a collection that's inspired by nature. We're talking about one of those today. We've done a collection in reclaimed materials because we want to be doing more of that. And the design inspiration is organic imperfection. I look at it and I think, oh, this reminds me of a leaf or being outside or whatever. It's not the same as being outside, but it's something.
That's beautiful.
does it
I've
show?
known you for years to be an avid reader. Is there a book, as we think about the journey of Bolder and Wiser, that you would recommend to folks who are on this journey?
There's one book that I've read in the last couple of years that I've read a few times that has changed the way that I interact with my team and also the way I think about navigating uncertainty. It's called The Art of Possibility. And it's written by this couple. It's a very like business applicable, leadership applicable book that's not actually written by people in business. It's super, super interesting examples, which is refreshing to read. I think it's written by the Zanders. Rosamund Zander is, I think, a psychologist, and Benjamin is the conductor of an orchestra. He has all these leadership examples of how he leads his orchestra through challenges and how he like pushes people to step into roles of greater responsibility and greater leadership and higher pressure and all of that. And then his wife helps unpack it. There are just so many things in that book that have become like little sound bites or mantras in my head. They've also pushed me to make different choices or choices differently with my team than I might have. I would encourage anyone to read it. And it starts off with this really cool exercise, which is fun to go through as a reader, so I won't spoil it. It's also really fun if you're kicking off an offsite and you want your team to warm their minds up with something. I think it's called the 9-box exercise. And it will tell you in a nutshell what it's like to read through the example of this book as a takeaway that you get from this quick visual exercise.
We'll include that in our show notes.
Awesome.
Final words. How do you want to be remembered?
I would most like to be remembered as someone who created space for others to grow. That's how I think about my role as a parent. So I really mean that specifically about my kids. Like I want them to feel like they have every opportunity and support to grow and learn and become like their fullest selves. I really would like my team at work to feel that way too.
Space to grow. Not an easy thing because there's a space that you give, and then space also has a boundary. And you also need to give guidance. So it's not just free formed, 100%. It's dynamic.
I place a lot of value on as an individual. So I think it would be really special to feel like I could create that for somebody.
I am leaving with goosebumps. So thank you for that powerful reminder. And for folks who want to stay connected with you, what's the best way for them to follow everything here?
Oh my goodness. You can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. I would love to hear from you. I guess we could put the link probably in the show notes, but Alison Vigil on LinkedIn. Allie, if you see me in a coffee shop, always happy to hear from anybody. Happy to connect over a coffee or a phone call or any of it. Keep an eye on Rocksbox for doing some fun things this year.
Yes, thank you.
We definitely will.
Yes,
Thank you so
God
much,
bless.
Allie, for coming. Your presence, as always, is a gift. And we look forward to seeing all the wonderful things you're going to do going forward.
Thanks